Hello everyone, and welcome to this video series on FreeCAD, where right now we are learning all about Sketcher Workbench. Now we have learned everything about point, lines and all of those different shapes. We also learned about some of the advanced shapes. In this video, what we are going to learn is all about constraints. When we were doing or when we were making different shapes, we did make certain constraints while we were doing fillets, while we were doing trimming, or while we were doing the extension of an edge. Right now, in this video, we are going to see several different ways in which we can constrain a sketch. Now, there are several different constraints that are available to us for use with Sketcher module. Now we'll go and have a look at each of them one by one. So let's get started. The first constraint that we are going to discuss is a coincident constraint. Now, what does coincident constraint mean? It means that if there are two circles and we want to make them concentric, we first press Ctrl and then select both the center points, and then when we press create a coincident constraint on the selected item, you can see that both of these circles now are concentric. If you move them, they both will move together. Concentric constraints can also be applied between a circle and an arc. So here I'm selecting the center point of a circle and a center point of an arc, and I'll click on the coincident constraint. Now you can see that it is shown that there is a capital C in brackets. What does that mean? It means that if I just press C key on the keyboard, it will have the same effect as pressing that button. It does not mean that coincident constraint only works for circles and arcs. It also works on two different line segments. Now if I select these 2 points of two different line segments and then click on the coincident constraint, what it means is that those two lines are fused, or those 2 points are fused in one point, and now I can move these lines as one. So in essence, this is now equivalent to having us drawing a line like this using the old trusty polyline tool. Now, polyline tools we had seen in the previous videos. If you haven't watched those videos, I would highly recommend you going back and having a look at all of those videos again, and then you can always come back here. Let's see where else can we use this coincident constraint. So let's select this endpoint of the arc and this endpoint of the line segment, and when we press coincident constraint is applied on the arc and the line segment. Now how about this? If I just create another line, coincident constraints can also be applied between center of a circle and a line, as can be seen here. So now wherever the line segment moves, the arc and the other line connected to it moves. Now the other way of creating coincident constraint is if you want to join this line segment, so this end of the line segment with this corner of the rectangle, again creating or clicking on the coincident button will make these 2 points coincident. Similarly, how about we make this point coincident with this point on that edge, and then this point coincident on this corner. So what effectively now happens is you can move this whole square or a rectangle by just clicking and dragging on the line that we just connected with 2 of the edges or 2 of the corners. So this is all about coincident constraint. Next is fix a point on an object constraint. Now what does that mean? We already saw how to fix these 2 points as one by clicking on the coincident constraint. Now what if we want this point to be on this line? To make that happen, you first click on the point, next you click on the line segment, and then you click on fix a point onto an object. When you click on it, you can see this small icon come up just near that point. What does that mean? It just means that this point is now on this line segment. Now the same thing can be achieved by pressing on your keyboard Shift O. So let's have a look at that. How about we make this point of this arc on this line segment? So now instead of pressing this button, we will click on Shift and O, and it makes this point or the end point of the arc on this line segment. Now similarly, we can make this point on this circle by clicking on the same way. The other thing is we can make the center of this circle on the periphery or edge of the bigger circle. So that way this center will always be, wherever you move this circle or this circle, the smaller circle will always be on the edge of this bigger circle. So that is all about fix a point onto an object. Next, let's have a look at how to create a vertical constraint. Now we all know, and we have already seen in the previous videos, that when you're creating a line segment, if you have the auto constraint on, then when you start creating a line segment and when it is nearly vertical, you will see a small icon appear just near the line segment icon, and when you click, it will make the line segment vertical. Now what if this line segment is not vertical and you would like to make it vertical? When you want to do it that way, then just select that line segment and click on Vertical Constraint, and it will make sure that this line segment will be vertical. Similarly, we can do it for any different orientation. As long as that we can select that line segment and we click on that vertical constraint button, it will make that line segment vertical. The shortcut key for that is V, so I'll press that V key on my keyboard and you can see that line segment turns vertical. Similarly, if you want to make this line segment horizontal, you can click on that line segment and then click on this button which says create a horizontal constraint on the selected item. Now same thing, even if you move anywhere, even if you change the length of it, this line will always remain horizontal. The other thing or other way of doing it is using a shortcut key. So select that line segment and then press H key on your keyboard and that line will be horizontal. Next constraint is making it parallel. Now don't make a mistake of thinking that these two lines also have a parallel constraint. No, they don't. These two lines only have a horizontal constraint associated with them. They are not parallel, but in essence all horizontal lines, they are parallel to each other. That's a given, but we haven't applied parallel constraint to these two lines here. Now what if we would like to create two lines which are parallel? First, we need to select those two lines and then we will click on this button which is somewhat showing that there are two parallel lines to each other at an angle. So when we click this button, it will make these two lines parallel. Now wherever we move this, if we move or if we rotate this, then the FreeCAD will make sure that these two lines stay parallel to each other. Now they are not horizontal or vertical yet, but they are parallel. Now similarly, how about we make these two lines parallel to each other? Now what if we make this line as horizontal? Let's add that additional constraint to it. So I selected that line segment and I'm clicking on horizontal. Now as you can see on the left hand side, we got sketch constraint, conflicting constraints. So what's happening is right now FreeCAD is complaining that there are some conflicting constraints, and it says that click to select. So when I click on it and then let's go, it says that all of these constraints are conflicting constraints. To just get rid of it, let's press Ctrl Z. When we press Ctrl Z, we are back at the point where these two lines are just parallel to each other. If you want to make any line horizontal or vertical and then make another line parallel to it, the best way to do it is first remove the parallel constraint, make this line as horizontal, and then select these two lines and then make them parallel. Again, when you do that, FreeCAD gives you an error and a warning message. So as you can see, FreeCAD will throw errors when you make two lines parallel and then make them horizontal, or make one line horizontal and then try to make another line parallel to it. So the best scenario, let's press Ctrl Z and come back. So now we are back at this line is horizontal and we want to make this line parallel to it. The best way to do it is just to make the top line as horizontal as well. But if we don't want to have it like that and we want to make sure that these lines at any angle they still remain parallel to each other, then the best way to do it is select those two and then make them parallel. Next, we are going to see how to make lines perpendicular to each other. Let's make this line perpendicular to that line. When I click on the Create a Perpendicular Constraint button, you can see that these two lines became perpendicular to each other. Now it does not mean that these two lines have all the other constraints associated with that, like this point on this line or anything like that. It just means that in this space, these two lines will always stay perpendicular to each other. Now just for fun, how about we make this line as vertical? When I click on that perpendicular, or when I hit that vertical constraint button, you can see that FreeCAD is having troubles trying to compute that one. So how about we go back, Ctrl Z, and we are back at perpendicular to each other constraint. Now if we actually want to make these two lines, one of them as vertical and the other one as horizontal, so in turn perpendicular to each other, again delete perpendicular constraint, first make this line horizontal, make this line vertical, and in essence these two lines would be perpendicular to each other. But if you want to make them perpendicular to each other at an angle, then you click on them and then you click on perpendicular button. Now again, if you want this point on this line, you can select that point, select that line, and then click on this button, fix a point onto an object, and you will get that point on that object, and these two lines would be connected at this point. Again, the same principle. If you have this line horizontal and this line at an angle and you want to make it perpendicular, you can make it perpendicular, but the trick here was to make the line horizontal first and then make the other line perpendicular to it. So that's how you can create perpendicular constraints. Next, we are going to see how to create a tangential constraint. Now, what is a tangential constraint? Tangential constraint can be formed between a circle and a line. So we select a circle and a line and we create a tangential constraint. Now when we create a tangential constraint, right now it does not look like they have a tangential constraint because this line is not touching this circle. But once when we start extending this line segment, you can see that these two lines are in fact tangent to each other. Now you can zoom in infinitely, and right now FreeCAD is showing that there is a gap in there, but FreeCAD is trying to make this circle as a polygon. If it was actually a circle, then you would not see a gap between a line and a circle if you have a tangential constraint associated with them. Now the same tangential constraint can be connected between several different entities. So you're not just limited to one, you can create that tangential constraint to several different entities. The way in which we can make this point on this arc by clicking on this and then making this line tangent to this. Will it work? Let's check out. It will work. So what's happening is you have two constraints associated with it. One is point on an arc, and the second one is tangential constraints. Now the question is, do you still need those two constraints for the same thing? I would suggest no. So if you want to make this line tangential to this arc, just select those two and then make them tangent to each other. And right now they are tangent when you extend this. So you extend this and you extend this line segment, and you can see that they are tangents to each other. So tangential constraint just does not, it's not that it just works with a circle and a line segment, it also works with arcs and a line segment. Now how about we make these two lines tangential to this circle? Can we create it like this? Let's click on it. FreeCAD will give you an error message, or it will throw an error saying with three objects there must be two curves and one point. So what does that mean? You need to select two curves, and then it needs to be, it can be tangential, but it will be tangential at one point. Okay, so if you make this circle and this arc tangential to each other, you can make them tangential and they will meet at a point. So that's what it meant. I'll hit Ctrl Z, come back to the original point. How about we make first this line tangential to this circle, and we make this line tangential to the circle again, and then we make this line tangential to this arc, and this line tangential to this arc again, and then this circle tangential, and then this circle tangential again. So you can create several different shapes using tangential constraints. Next, let's have a look at equal constraint. What does that mean? Right now you can see that there is a size difference between this line segment and this line segment. If you want them to be equal, you select both the line segments and click on create an equality constraint between two lines or between circles and arc. When you click on that, the length of this line segment will be same as the length of the other line segment. If I change the length of one line segment, the length of the other line segment will increase. Now remember that we did learn how to create rectangles and how to create squares. You can make a square out of a rectangle. How? Select the two coincident line segments of the rectangle and then click on Equality Constraint. When you hit that, the entire rectangle now becomes a square. You can click or hit Equality Constraint between two circles. What that means is the diameter or the radiuses of those circles will be equal. The same thing you can do with a circle and an arc. When you click on that, the diameters and the radiuses of the circles and the arcs will be equal. Next, what if we want to make this point on the center of this line segment? Now, how do we do it? To do it, you first click on this endpoint, hit Control button, or click on the other endpoint of that line segment, and then click on the point which you want halfway or at the midpoint of this line segment. And then click on create a symmetry constraint between 2 points with respect to the line or a third point. When you click on that, FreeCAD creates a symmetric constraint so that this vertical line segment will be attached to the midpoint of this line segment. Now, what if we want to make this point in the center of this rectangle? Now, we don't have any other construction lines where we can find out the center of that point, but we want to make, without creating any more construction lines or anything, we want to make this point. We want to make this point in the center of this rectangle. How do we do that? First, click on this endpoint. Next, select the diametrically opposite endpoint or the corner of the rectangle. And third, select the point which you want at the center of the line segment, which is an imaginary line segment passing or connecting the two diametrically opposite endpoints or corner points. And then click on Symmetric Constraint, and this line segment is now exactly at the center of this rectangle. Now, if you make this square by clicking on these two and making them equal, then this line segment will be at the center point of this square. Right now, let's just keep it at the center point of this rectangle. Next, sometimes what happens is you create a nice curve. Now, this curve is the curve that was created using create a B-spline in the Sketcher module. Now, we have learned all about how to create this, if you change the position of this circle, the entire curve changes. But what if this curve is exactly as per what you want, and then you don't want to change the shape of this curve? How do you do that? Now, if you had to actually do it, then you will have to create so many constraints for each and every center points of this circle. You have to constrain it, you have to give lots of different constraints. Is there an easier way to just fix this shape? Well, there is. Select on the Bezier curve and then click on create a block constraint on a selected item. Now, I would like to call this as a freeze button. So when you click on it, this is frozen now. You cannot change it. Even if you move it or try to move it, it is frozen. Now, normally I don't like to use this frozen constraint, but this is like in extreme cases or extreme scenarios, you would use that. I never have personally used it for the simple reason that it becomes very tedious. And how do we unfreeze this one? Now, there is no unfreeze button after that, is there? The selected edge already has a block constraint to it. So how do we then unfreeze this? To unfreeze it, we have to go on the left hand side in the constraints panel, and then we select this and then we hit delete, and then this is again editable. Again, I generally never use the freeze button or the freeze constraint, but I'm showing it just so that you can use it if you want to. Again, we can freeze this and this shape. So if you want to freeze this shape like this, we can click on it and then this shape is frozen. So you cannot change it anyhow. Now, if I go in here and I can delete those constraints, frozen constraints, and we will be able to edit that rectangle again. Now, you can see that we can now edit this rectangle again, but the circle is still frozen. because I haven't removed this frozen constraint. Now, as you can see, if we delete that, then we can change the shape or the diameter of the circle. We can also move its position because right now it is not frozen. So that's how we can see all the different types of constraints and how to use them and when to and where to use them. So first we saw a coincident constraint. Next we saw point on an object constraint. Then we saw vertical constraint. Next we saw horizontal constraint. Then we saw parallel constraint. And then we saw perpendicular constraint. After perpendicular constraint, we saw tangential constraint and how to use that. After tangential constraint, we saw equality constraint. So how to make two line segments or two circles or a circle and an arc to be equal. Next, we saw how to make symmetric constraint and how to fix a point on the center point of a line segment, or how to fix a point on the center of the square. And last, we saw how to fix a shape in space. Now you don't have to create any more constraints if you fix that shape, but then again you don't know what that shape is, so it becomes a bit tricky. So these are different constraints that you can use in Sketcher module. And with that, I'll say thank you for your company and I'll see you in the next video.